My name is Michelle. I'm the CEO of Surrey Domestic Abuse Services. Our services provide vital support to adults and children experiencing domestic abuse across East Surrey. Part of our services is providing outreach, where we help people with criminal and civil law, benefits, debt, housing, among many other things. We also provide therapeutic recovery services, both for adults and children, which include group work and counselling. I'm really pleased today to welcome you to Surrey Police Live. We've been a weekly show where we're able to give you an insight into the workings of our local police force, so you can understand it more as a member of the community. This week I'm pleased to launch as well Surrey Domestic Abuse Awareness Week, where we'll have a campaign highlighting coercive control and that all domestic abuse is physical. Part of today's session is that we will be looking at coercive control in detail, who's a victim of it, how it might manifest, or how you might experience that in your relationships, but also how you might be able to help your friends and family identify what might be happening to them, what support's available, and also what perpetrators might do to those people. We'll talk a bit about how perpetrator behaviour. We'll also talk about what the force is doing to enable survivors to come forward and to hold perpetrators to account. What we know is in Surrey that domestic abuse is exceptionally prevalent. It cuts across all social classes, all economic and political classes. It affects both men and women, but is also gendered, and by that we mean it affects mainly women and is perpetrated by men. But having said that, men can be victims too, both of female offenders and also within relationships with men, and so it's really important that we acknowledge that too. Children also under the new Domestic Abuse Act have just been labelled as victims in their own right, and we're doing extensive work in Surrey to make sure we address those concerns. So some of what we might discuss tonight might be triggering for you. In the chat function you'll see the numbers of the Surrey Domestic Abuse Support Service information, including the helpline, which is open right now, and the online chat service, which is also open now, both of which you can talk to somebody trained in domestic abuse if you need it or you're concerned about a friend or family member. I'm delighted to be joined by Fiamma and Matt this evening, who I'll get to introduce themselves, and then we'll be dealing with some questions.
Good evening, my name is Fiamma Pather and I'm the CEO of Your Sanctuary. We are a domestic abuse charity based in Woking. We offer outreach services to the northwest part of Surrey for both adults and children, offering emotional and practical support to anybody affected by domestic abuse. We also run the Surrey-wide domestic abuse helpline that Michelle has just mentioned, and we run 2 refuges in northwest Surrey for women and their children who are fleeing domestic abuse. Matt.
Yes, Matt Barcroft-Barnes. I'm a temporary detective superintendent from Surrey Police. I work in the Public Protection Department. So within my role, I'm the lead in Surrey for a range of areas: domestic abuse, which we're going to talk about tonight, harmful traditional practices and rape and serious sexual offences, but also a new emerging area for policing, which is violence against women and girls, which we'll talk to you about tonight, which as Michelle says, we're talking about an engendered offence which affects women more than men, because there are engendered natures around control and coercion, which we can talk to you about. But equally, by recognising that, we can also talk to you about male victims and female perpetrators. We can talk to you about the way that domestic abuse is experienced in different communities, such as LGBTQ+, black and minority ethnic groups, and the work that we're doing to give a really bespoke community-led response to that, which hopefully we can talk you through this evening.
Thanks, Emma. I think what would be really useful is if we start with some discussion about what coercive control actually is, and how it might manifest itself in relationships, and if you think that there has been a change in people's understanding around domestic abuse. So coercive control is obviously something that feels relatively new for people, so I think the public will probably be really keen to hear. So Fiamma, do you want to start from maybe a specialist service perspective, and then Matt from a policing perspective, what that means for you?
I think certainly over the past few years, I think the conversation has definitely moved from talking about domestic abuse and perhaps focusing a lot on the physical abuse, which is much easier to recognise. Both survivors and their friends and families can recognise when somebody is being physically abused. There might be bruises and what have you. The thing about coercive control is that it is very insidious. It creeps up on people. Often perpetrators first start to exert that control in very small ways at the beginning of a relationship, and it might come across as actually the perpetrator really cares about me. So they might say things like, you know, where are you going this evening? I'll come and pick you up after you've met with your friends. Then it might grow to, you know, I only want you to go out on certain evenings. I don't want you to go out with these people. I don't want you to wear those clothes when you go out. And then it might go to actually isolating that survivor, that victim, from their friends, from their family. And that can take place over a period of time, sometimes very short, sometimes a longer period of time. And it becomes somebody's norm. That is the way that relationship runs. That's how their life is. And then that control can exert itself over every aspect of their lives. What they dress, who they talk to, where they work, if they work, how they parent their children, what they cook, their access to money. All of that can be controlled. And a perpetrator builds this feeling of fear. So although they might not actually physically abuse somebody, there's always the threat there that they will do something. They might do it once, enough so that you know it might be repeated. And so you are living in an atmosphere of fear and threats and control. And I think a lot of people don't really understand how it can happen to people, but because of this slow nature of it ramping up, it just becomes part of your life, and you don't really recognise that you're in a coercive and controlling relationship.
And I think that's really important from our services. Some of the things that we see and hear is people describing coercive control as walking on eggshells, and that, as Fiamma says, that underlying anxiety about the key in the lock and what your day might bring, what consequence you might get for something you don't even know that you've done. And when we're talking about prevalence, we're talking about 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men in their lifetime. So, and Surrey is no different to that. And sometimes it's hidden because of a perceived level of affluence, a perceived myth, really, that domestic abuse happens in more deprived areas, and that's absolutely not the case. I know certainly for my service last year, we dealt with over 2,000 referrals, and that's just in Reigate, Manston, Tandridge, Mill Valley, across the county. It was over 7,500 referrals into our specialist services. So the prevalence is significant, and that's just the real tip of the iceberg. And we talk about policing, only about 20% of domestic abuse gets reported to the police. So there's a huge way to go in terms of uncovering the actual harm and the actual terror that people are experiencing. So Matt, in terms of coercive control, it feels in some ways quite new for policing, even though it was 2015 the legislation came in. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about how that kind of feels for policing at the moment.
Yeah, and we talk about this a lot, don't we? So I think that's probably one of the strengths that we have in Surrey, is we work together as a partnership in it. So me from the police, yourselves from outreach here, but there's a wider partnership as well, isn't there? So we regularly talk with the local authority in health and education, and we try to understand domestic abuse together. And I think what we've seen this year in particular, probably triggered by the horrific murder of Sarah Everard, was that sort of drive from a whole range of bodies to really understand domestic abuse. And I think the key that I've seen is, I don't know if you agree, is but the change from policing domestic violence to policing domestic abuse, and that's been a real tangible change. And I've said that to a few different groups before, and where they've not known about those changes, they always ask, what does that actually mean? I think where policing and other authorities and different agencies in the past, we've always looked at the instant as it's occurred. So we've gone there and we've seen this has been reported, and it might be a criminal damage that's reported, or there's an assault that's reported. And historically, we've dealt with that in isolation. The big shift that we've noticed, or that we've really driven towards, probably since March this year, has been around looking at it as a pattern of events, which I don't know if you agree, but I think got triggered by the partnership invited Professor Evan Stark to come and talk to us, a leading world-renowned professor around controlling coercive behaviour. and he spoke to, I think it was just over 100 senior leaders from the partnership. And within a week, I think everybody was having these conversations around actually what does control and coercion mean. Actually, almost overnight, we need to relook at how we're looking at this. And there's some key messages that he was talking about in that. And he talked about that violence model. And actually, if you stop somebody in terms of their violence, that is one thing. But the control and coercion, that's having an even greater effect on someone's access to dignity and human rights in their whole life. But that is a complete pattern of events, and policing's really picked up on that quickly in a very short period of time, which is driven, I think, by we've got the Home Office is driving that, which is really important because then we get the buy-in. We've got a new PCC in Surrey who's really looking at violence against women and girls, which is really encouraging because it means that we can keep building on the work that we've been doing already. There's a fundamental, very large task in policing because we know we need to get up to scratch with this. We know the new offence from 2015 is actually 7 years old now. But then the Home Office report from March this year is really clear around actually policing in general hasn't really ever got the chance to understand that because there's been changes to legislation, to the way it's recorded. And this is a real opportunity, I think, for policing and the wider partnership to make a real change in how we understand control and coercion. Because it's such a complex area, but once you get it, it fundamentally changes your understanding of it. And I think we've talked before, haven't we, around the Jane Monckton Smith book, In Control, Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder. And there's things that I probably looked at a year ago and made decisions on, and since then I've read various books and been to various training courses and seen various things that have happened. My experience has opened up, and a year ago would I have made those same decisions? I think I probably wouldn't. And I've spoken to a lot of police officers who also read that and understood control and coercion, and it's made a significant change in the way that they now view and understand that, which I think is a really positive thing, but a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I think the next step after that is that things like this, engaging with you, the public, in terms of it's one thing for agencies to understand what coercive control is. It's something in the specialist sector that we've always understood, but there wasn't legislation available for survivors to access justice. But it's the next stage to help people understand that they might be experiencing coercive control, and I think that's where we've got a responsibility as agencies, really, to keep pushing out these messages and doing stuff like that. I think we're going to see a video clip of Luke and Ryan Hart speaking about their own experience of their mother and sister's murder and growing up in a home where there was coercive control, and then we'll have some discussion about that.
A mother and her daughter killed in a swimming pool car park. 3 dead, all from the same family. We know how it happened, but why such brutality will take longer to comprehend.
It's a course of conduct, if you like. It's a way of behaving that means that one person is in control of the other person. It might be a partner, it might be another family member, but that's the ultimate aim, that somebody feels in some way entitled to control that other person. And up until 2015, that wasn't against the law. The clever perpetrators actually don't need to use physical violence in order to control their partner or their family member. And I myself had clients who I would sit opposite trying to talk to who would be visibly shaking because they were so frightened, but they had never been hit. And I think this is one of the great myths around domestic abuse, is that it always means physical violence, and it really doesn't.
We kept looking for a big event to kind of give us almost an excuse to leave, and it was only violence we're looking out for before we thought that was a good enough reason for us to leave.
Yeah, it was never violent, and was really sort of proud of himself and considered like that to be a moral crown, but then broke it immediately in killing our mother and sister.
What we were hearing from a lot of our clients was that that aspect of being abused was the aspect that was the most difficult to recover from. Not that they were advocating physical violence, but they said, you know, the bruises, they would heal. You don't have the space in your head to make any decisions about leaving or how to parent your children or anything else other than surviving day to day and trying to avoid the consequences and the punishment of not doing what your perpetrator wants you to do.
There was never any violence, never any physical hitting, but we now come to realise that that's only a small part of domestic abuse, and that it's the controlling and coercive behaviour which is what we suffered under, and it takes away your life. Even though there's no violence, it does take away your life and your freedoms.
So again, just to reiterate that clip, Luke and Ryan's story and the story of their mother and their sister and their eventual murder is incredibly difficult to watch and to hear. So just a reminder that about the online chat service and also the helpline service, which have been posted into the chat function. As we go through, I'll remind you periodically of that because people might join us at different times. So following on from our discussion, I think some of the content that Luke and Ryan talked to in that clip is very much about how quite often people don't know that they're experiencing coercive control particularly. So if there is physical violence, that's very easy to see. It doesn't mean that it's easy to leave or make decisions about your relationship, but it definitely gives a very clear message that that's abuse. Whereas coercive control, as you say, is insidious. It creeps up on you. Perpetrator's behaviour might be more subtle, and it very much is about what Evan Stark says about limiting someone's space for action. And I think when we talk about it, we talk about in training, we say that it's about, you know, who was the person before they started this relationship, and that's what you're really looking for, isn't it, with your friends and family or someone that you love, is have they changed since they got into this relationship? You know, are they dressing differently? Are they saying that they don't want to, you know, they don't want to come out and socialise, they can't go for those drinks after work, or they can't even work overtime, or getting calls throughout the day, that type of stuff. I think there's some really key messages on what we think about what's healthy and unhealthy in a relationship, and sometimes I think also when we're friends, families, colleagues, we shy away from it, even if, you know, I think that's a real issue, that we're nervous. We have this still myth that this is a private matter, and some of that I think links into the fact that coercive control has only been criminalised in 2015, but some of it, I guess, is about culturally what's acceptable for us. Should we be asking about what goes on behind closed doors? And actually, yes, we should, when people's lives are at risk. And coercive control is one of those biggest indicators, isn't it, of significant harm or even fatal domestic abuse. So I think that's why we're doing this discussion today, is that we really want to highlight that it's not just emotional, psychological, coercive abuse. It could be a really important indicator of serious harm to come in the case, as was in the case of Luke and Ryan Hart's mum and sister. So Fiona, what do you think, what other signs do you think there could be in terms of warning signs or behaviours that perpetrators might display that people can kind of look out for?
The difficulty is that, you know, perpetrators come in all shapes and sizes. Unfortunately, they don't have a label across their forehead to say that that's what they are. But and I think there's also a myth that perpetrators have a problem with anger and that they are angry people everywhere, and they're not. A lot of perpetrators are extremely clever, very manipulative. So to the outside world, they can appear to be very charming, very helpful. They function very well. They can have very highly functioning jobs. So I think the clues are really from their partners. What are they saying about perpetrator behaviour? What are they saying about what makes the perpetrator angry with the survivor or the victim? Because a healthy relationship is about two equal people in a relationship. You shouldn't be expressing fear or telling, well, I can't do this. He doesn't like me to do that. He says I couldn't wear this. He doesn't like me being out too late. I think those sorts of sentences and comments that people might make in passing to a friend or a family member should just raise a bit of a question mark actually in people's minds. And I think the thing to really remember is that when we've spoken to survivors, most of them have said, if anybody had asked me, I would have told them, but nobody asked me about it. And so I think we've all got to get over this fear of being impolite or interfering, because actually, when it comes to this could be, not wanting to sound too dramatic, but you could save somebody's life. You could help them get out of a really horrible abusive situation.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of questions coming from Facebook. There's one from Tina, and she asks, how prevalent is domestic abuse in Surrey? So, Matt, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about police stats in relation to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, domestic abuse is in all sections of Surrey, isn't it? All sections of society, and often, frustratingly, from the policing side, it's also that hidden crime, as we've talked about already. So we know that the crime that comes to us, as in the reports that come to the police that we can then go and deal with, there's a significant gap between that and the referrals that go to charities and outreach services such as yourselves. So we're trying to do as much as we can do to bridge that gap, but it's prevalent throughout all of Surrey. And equally, it's a priority for Surrey Police. We have a control strategy where we look at the various areas that are important to us in policing. And I think really importantly, this year we've taken domestic abuse off the control strategy and put controlling coercive behaviour on there, because that just shows that we want to understand it more. We see it as a priority for us, and if you report it to Surrey Police, it's something that we will deal with properly. And I think going back to what you were saying before as well, Michelle, around the approach we're trying to take with our new police officers. And we've got this great new wave of new police officers coming in, and they all really get this and are really passionate around trying to understand. And we've got some really good training courses that help them to understand it. But it's around trying to create that curiosity with them around what's going on, which I think is equally important within families and friends of those undergoing this. And what we say to them is, don't expect to hear the words, I'm being controlled or he's being coercive. Be more curious around that. What are the things that are happening in the background? What are the behavioural changes in the victim or in the perpetrator? What is the things that you just have that gut feeling that aren't right? So that's what we're trying to teach the police officers, and I think equally that is relevant to friends and family. If you start to feel that way, maybe there is something going on there which we should be looking at.
Absolutely. I think really positively we've got two really nice comments here actually about Surrey Police and the outreach services. So we've got one from Samantha to say that she'd like to say thank you both to ESDAS and Surrey Police for all the help in the past. As a survivor of coercive controlling behaviour, both organisations helped me get out of the situation. Many thanks. I'd urge people to contact both organisations if they needed help. Thanks again. And one from Lizzie to say thank you to Surrey Police and all DV outreach services. I've just started the Freedom Programme, so much support out there. And I think that's, that's amazing to receive that feedback. Obviously, that's why we do the jobs that we do. But I think more importantly, particularly in policing, you get a really hard time often from the media. And although I can see how helpful that is, we want policing to improve, we want it to learn, we want every response to be great. Sometimes the negativity around it in terms of police response acts as a real barrier to people coming forward. So I'm really grateful both to Sam and to Lizzie for bringing that forward, because we need people to have confidence in the police, and actually the survivors that we work with had negative experiences. We've at least been able to feed that back to policing, and that's what we do. Even if people don't feel confident to call police, then if they contact us and they've had a bad experience, we can raise those concerns and we can hopefully repair some of that damage, because we know domestic abuse is a repeated crime. And so, that one bad response, we don't want it to put you back and to not pick up the phone again when you do need people. So I think that's having confidence, and I think what you're saying, Matt, is important. The police want to learn, and it's coming from a backdrop of maybe not understanding previously, but now listening to people like Professor Evan Stark, Professor Jane Monckton Smith. You've got that thirst to do it, and you want to share that kind of narrative. We've got another question here about what can you do when it's usually one word against another. And I think we've talked about the hidden nature, but I think maybe make you talk a bit about the evidence kind of gathering with coercive control, what you'd look to in that sense.
Absolutely. So, a lot of our cases are one word against another. And those cases do get charged and prosecuted, and people do go to prison for those cases. And but we look at the wider event. So if you've got one person saying one thing, one person saying another thing, there are lots of things we can do to gather evidence to try to support that person. So it might be that they've told friends or family. It might be when we speak to them, their account is really what we'd call compelling and really strong. You'd look at that and just think, God, this is a really strong, horrific account. But also, I think in policing, where we're really moving towards, and the big step forward for me, is we're now perpetrator focused. So we used to, as you see in the news, around maybe our sexual offences, we would look at the phone of the person making the complaint and the victim, and we would look into the detail there. And I think we've come a long way over the last few years. Actually, now if we get a report through, actually we should be saying, okay, what is the perpetrator doing? Well, actually, what's on their phone? What are they looking at on their internet search history? What are the things that they're doing on a daily basis? And just because you think there isn't other evidence out there, I guarantee in most cases there will be. And the teams will go and find it, and they're really passionate about doing that, and they've got really good at it as well. So, we want to hear these stories. We want to help people, and absolutely do not be put off by thinking there isn't more stuff out there to support it. I guarantee there will be, and hopefully we'll find it.
Because I think what also happens is that people do notice things, but they might not just put it all together. So I think police being professionally curious like that, and maybe talking to neighbours, friends, maybe colleagues, you'll start to pick up those patterns of behaviour. Maybe the perpetrator was in the car park every night picking up their partner, even when the partner didn't really want that, and you'll start to put those things together. So. And also the other thing that we've not talked much about is around the finances and around economic abuse, and that's something that can be tracked. Actually, there will be evidence potentially that somebody didn't have access to their money even though they were working or they were claiming benefits. So if you're curious enough, I think you can definitely find some evidence for sure.
I think also that as much as we want domestic abuse a hidden crime, we can't police our way out of domestic abuse. Like, it really does need a holistic community-based response, and so that is about that education within community, whatever community that is, of whether that's a school community, a workplace type community, voluntary sector organisation. We're not going to, the police won't be able to, the criminal justice system won't be able to deal with absolutely everything because it's a beyond reasonable doubt threshold. However, there is civil law, and civil law can be really helpful, and in outreach services we help people to access civil law in terms of injunctions, in terms of child arrangement orders, all sorts of things. So I wouldn't, if somebody didn't want to report to the police, I wouldn't ever want them to think that was their only option. There's so many different options, and people have really valid reasons for not wanting to criminalise their partner. It doesn't matter how bad their abuse is. You might not want to send your partner to prison. That might not be the outcome that you're looking for. So in outreach services, that's absolutely something that we look to. We've got a question here from Ian on Facebook. And he says, sometimes the perpetrator has so much control, it's really difficult for family members who suspect their family member is in a controlling relationship to be able to support them. What advice would you give them? I guess I'd extend an offer to Ian to contact the helpline or the online chat tonight if you are concerned about somebody, or contact one of the outreach services tomorrow morning, depending on what area you're in. And those details will be at the end in the chat again if you need to find them, because we support friends and family as well, and that's a really crucial bit of what we do, because it's absolutely heartbreaking to see somebody that you love change dramatically, lose who they are as a person, who you know them to be. But there are some really key ways that you can support them, and I'm sure Fiamma would agree. The most obvious one is to be consistent, be a consistent safe space. I think it's really tempting to say, this is the last time you've turned up at my door after they've done something, but you refuse to leave. It's really easy to give that ultimatum, but you're never going to win that as a friend or family member, because the perpetrator's the one with the control, the perpetrator's the one that is feared, where the consequence of that behaviour is. So use us in outreach services to help you keep going, even if it's just that chat every now and again to say you're doing the right thing, because the day will come when they are ready and it will be your door that they stand up on, because the perpetrator is banking on all the friends and family from backing off. They make everybody part of the control, don't they?
Sure.
So that's what they want, is for you to say, no, I'm done, because that makes the isolation far easier to achieve. Is there anything you want to add to that, Fiona?
Well, I would just say that the fact that you've recognised that that this person is being controlled is massive, and that you'll be able to talk about that with the survivor, because it might be difficult for them to recognise it. So the fact that you've spotted it and you'll be able to have those conversations, I think the really important thing about those conversations is that you believe that person, that you're utterly non-judgmental, and as Michelle said, you walk alongside them, and that's what we do in our outreach services. Often people will engage with us for a while and then it becomes too much or too difficult and they go away and then they come back again, and I know that many survivors really value that in our services, and they will value that from a family or a friend, that they're always there. It might take years and they might dip in and out of that friendship because that's all they can do at the time, but to show them that compassion and that empathy is absolutely vital, and if you're doing that, you're doing an amazing thing for that person.
We've had another question from Tina in relation to will there be further education for young people who may be in coercive controlling relationships? And I think, Matt, we've talked about in terms of policing as well. I think there's a real key aim, isn't there, of policing to engage earlier in the earlier stage of the relationship, and I think we're also seeing increased reporting in that age group, aren't we? Particularly 16 to 24-year-olds, more reporting, but we know relationships start later. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about young people. And
and you said already, Michelle, around it's policing and policing your way out of this. I think the solution is, and the answer is, that we work as a strong partnership to deal with this.
Yeah.
So we have a close relationship with our educational partners and our local authority, and our violence against women and girls strategy that we've got at the moment. One of the key areas that we see as just this big risk that we want to deal with, but we need to find the solution to do it, is around what happens in schools. And we've seen things such as the Everyone's Invited website, which is just this fantastic opportunity for people to put their story somewhere and to have it seen. But it does make you think actually what goes on with our young adults, our teenage offenders, our teenage survivors, what happens in schools, and that's a real challenge for us. Our Chief Constable's already raised that as a key area that we want to try to find a solution to, but I won't lie, it's a big challenge. We've got various educational establishments within Surrey. What we need to do is try to find a way that we can look at what happens within the schools in a way that is actually supportive of the people in the schools, but we make safe places, and then we try to do something to intervene with perpetrators in particular, I think, before they develop into the people that we see within our roles, which is these really serious repeat perpetrators. But there's a lot of work to do, but we are fully driven and task orientated to get there.
I think that taps in also to some of the work we do in outreach, so as much as possible we try and go into schools or youth groups and to try and raise awareness of what a healthy relationship looks like, because sometimes even the terminology of domestic abuse and coercive control doesn't sit well with young people, so we talk about relationship abuse more than we would talk about domestic abuse. And also how social media is used, digital ways of abusing someone is far more prevalent, or it is in older age groups. In that young group, it's far more rife, and often as older adults we don't understand. We don't understand the things that they're experiencing, so again that's our job to make ourselves understand. And I think when we're talking about perpetrators who might be younger, we also need to think about making sure that we don't criminalise young people where there isn't a need to. So if they're at showing those early stages of unhealthy or abusive relationships and behaviours, maybe that might manifest itself into the way they behave towards their parents. So we talk, sometimes people are increasingly interested in adolescent to child violence, but actually what we try and avoid is calling those young people perpetrators, because quite often that behaviour is coming from a place of trauma. and that we need to offer some trauma-informed services to them. So we're looking at that with our partners in the county council as well, and policing to see, and the youth charities to see what we can do to distinguish, really, aren't we? And also not to forget about children who are often the real hidden victims of domestic abuse. As I said in the intro, in the new Domestic Abuse Act, they're now thankfully seen as victims in their own right, but that hasn't been the case until just now, and as I'm sure Fiamma will attest, they've been seen as bystanders.
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of child survivors have been called witnesses, or they've witnessed, or they've seen these things happening as if they're somehow mentally and emotionally removed from what's going on in their house. And we know, sadly, from talking to children who have had that going on in their household with their parents, that they absolutely feel the trauma just as much as the adult survivor. They're frightened. Their world is very, very scary place. It's a very insecure place. And they need just as much support as the adult survivor does. So we were really pleased when that came through on the DA Act. I think it's a really important thing to state, and hopefully will help all of us understand how it might be for a child survivor, but also help to drive resources and support, because there isn't enough really. And it isn't inevitable, therefore, that if you've seen that as a child, that you will grow up and either be a victim or a perpetrator of domestic abuse. I think we have to stop thinking that way, and we have to support those children as victims of trauma, as victims of domestic abuse, and give them the appropriate support out of it, for sure.
We've got a few more questions coming from Facebook. So the first one is, if someone wanted help and called a domestic abuse service, would they have to talk to the police?
No, they wouldn't. We're very clear that our services are, one, confidential, and secondly, they're needs-led. So every survivor that contacts us is different and has different needs, is in a different situation. We would inform that survivor that what was happening to them was a criminal offence, and we would say that in order to bring the perpetrator to account, that it is possible to go to the police, and we might advocate that, and we might help them and support them if they wanted to make a statement to the police, but we would never force anybody to do anything that they were not comfortable doing. And what it might be is that they just need more time, or it might be that they never get to that. For a lot of survivors, what they actually want is they want the abuse to stop. They want their lives back. They want those freedoms back. And maybe for them, the criminal justice system isn't the best path. So we will talk to them about it. We'll talk to them about it.
Thanks, Gemma. Just someone's put here a bit of an advice, a point suggesting that should they have a trusted friend, keep all documents and medication in a safe place in case they needed an escape route, and is there any other advice? And I think absolutely. I think if you, as we said earlier, if you can be a safe space for somebody, that can be really helpful for all sorts of practical reasons, but it is about creating a space where if someone needed to run and they needed to just leave, that they can come to you and you have what they need for the next 24 hours, or you have copies of documents, because if they need to flee, there's certain things that they might need, and some of which we obviously won't touch on now for particular reasons, for safety reasons, but yes, things like having bags packed and children's toys, or extra formula milk or whatever it is really crucial.
And some money, actually, because if you're just running out in the middle of the night, so practical stuff like that, really helpful.
And I'd really again encourage either friends or family or survivors themselves to talk to your local outreach service. You can do that anonymously, to do that sort of safety planning. We can give you tips on one, how to keep yourself safer within your relationship. You can't prevent abuse from occurring, because that's the perpetrator's choice to abuse. But what you can do is minimise some of the risk to yourself, the harm. We can talk to you about that. We can talk to you about how to keep yourself safe in the relationship, planning to leave, and then what to do when you have made the decision to leave. So do reach out, and the same for friends. We've got another question here about how has lockdown affected domestic abuse, and I think It has been awful.
Yeah.
I was sharing earlier with a colleague. I remember when lockdown happened, and everyone was buying toilet roll, and I remember getting into bed with my partner and crying because I just thought I just said to him, everyone's worried about toilet roll, and all I can think about is how horrific it is to be locked in with your abuser and the consequences of that. And I think now it's got a lot of attention, thankfully.
Yeah.
But that's the real reality of that we were all had restrictions placed upon us, but we weren't locked in with somebody abusive, and even now how perpetrators might use those government guidelines and restrictions to maintain control, even though those restrictions are lessening. I think this external threat has given perpetrators permission very much, and not being at work.
Yeah.
In what we've seen is increases in physical and sexual violence because perpetrator doesn't need to worry about being detected, I guess. What about for you, Fiamma? What's your...
Well, I had exactly the same feelings. So all those tiny moments of respite that a survivor might have got, walking the kids to school, popping to the shops, going to work, all of that was stripped away. And you're literally locked in your house with a very cruel, abusive person. And not only was the adult survivor therefore locked in there, so were the children. They had no respite either. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't see their grandparents. They couldn't see their friends. And even we were supporting some older children who were away from the perpetrator, living with their non-abusive parent, but that non-abusive parent was in their own recovery, and those young people, their mental health plummeted during this time because their ability to see their friends, do the out of school stuff that they loved, go to school, go to college, all of that was stripped away. It was a very, very tough time, and what we noticed on our helpline was that the number of survivors that were calling us for obvious reasons really dipped, but more friends and family were ringing who were really, really worried about somebody who was stuck and locked in with their abuser, and our chat service went up as well. So we had instances of women sitting in their toilets with their phones trying to reach out to us via the chat service because it was the only place where they have 2 minutes. It's almost unimaginable to be living like that in your own home, which should be your safe space, with the person who's supposed to love you, but is putting you through this horrific abuse. Yeah.
And I think that's the complicated thing, isn't it, often about domestic abuse, when you're talking about the abuse being committed by someone that you love and is supposed to love you and says that they love you and may well also say sorry after physical or sexual violence has occurred. That does things to your thought process and makes it incredibly difficult to make decisions about leaving or ending your relationship, and that's without the fear of consequences, I guess. We've got another question, Matt, here about Operation Encompass and how you might protect children in schools who've witnessed domestic abuse.
So we're doing a lot of work to reach out to the schools, and just to maybe just come back to the previous question as well. The period for us has been, I think, to sum it up, a period of frustration, but also feeling quite powerless within ourselves, because we knew this was going on, we knew the violence was happening, and we were seeing these horrific stories coming through to us. And we were doing everything we could do to try to reach out and to get these reports, but we'd seen projections that domestic abuse reports would come through and increase to the police, and we didn't see those reports coming through to us, but we knew that yourselves in outreach and charities were having this significant spike of a third plus increase in reporting. So we did as much as we could do to be proactive, but the thing that we have seen is, as you said, lockdown measures being used as a tool by perpetrators, and I think similar within schools, lockdown measures have had that effect of almost increasing and enhancing the effect that abuse has had within children. So we've increased our processes and our communication and the conversations with children's services and education, and just trying to get that regular flow of information just to try to do some protection. But all I say from our side, from policing, is just be aware of advice you're getting from people around restrictions, because yes, restrictions we need to be following and they're there for a reason, but always just check actually if somebody is using restrictions of you to restrict your movements with your family and your friends and your contacts, or the way that your children are at school and the abuse that might happen within an educational setting, just to make sure that they are giving you the right restrictions, because we have seen them being used to control and be coercive towards people.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way of that is to check that it's really clear on the government website, isn't it, what the restrictions
Absolutely,
are, and if you do have access, if you are able to access a computer safely, then do check them out. And again, contact, if you're not sure, you can contact us, or you can contact police online or 101. We've got another couple of questions here just before we've is there any correcting CCB? And I guess what I'm taking from that question, although I might be wrong, so forgive us if I'm wrong, is can perpetrators change? Can people that perpetrate coercive control and behaviour change? I mean, I know, Matt, you're doing a lot of work on this, and perpetrators taking responsibility and perpetrator interventions at the moment, so...
Yeah, there's a lot of work we're doing in this area. So we, I mean, yes, people can change, perpetrators can change, and there's always that thing, you need an intervention to get that change. So that's a big thing we've been working on in Surrey within the local authority and with the police and the Officers of Police and Crime Commissioner, is they're trying to get perpetrator programmes and to be able to give the offer of people the chance to change and have this programme of change. And there will be people who we've sort of talked about already who have maybe those adverse childhood experiences which might end up with them becoming a perpetrator. Equally, other people might not be a perpetrator, but for those ones who just have that crux moment where they think, actually, I'm going to change, then we can offer a programme of behavioural change and understanding and looking at their maybe obsessive behaviours and how they can control that. So yeah, people can change, and we've got a range of initiatives in Surrey that we're trying to do to improve that. So things such as our domestic violence protection notices, which are notices we can give to people if there's a level of evidence that we can apply restriction of them through a court order for 28 days. What we're trying to do is also offer the opportunity to go on a perpetrator programme. So absolutely people can change. It needs to be done in the right way, and I think there's a real risk with some of those programmes. If you don't apply them properly and they're not measured properly, actually what you can do is you can teach perpetrators to be more clever and to reduce violence but increase coercion. So as part of the work we're doing is when we apply those programmes, we need to be really clear and understand it might have reduced violence, but actually has it made the situation even worse, because you've now got a perpetrator who understands how the police work, how we assess their offending behaviours and what our measures are, and will they have this even more controlled relationship, which is even more restricted to somebody's access to dignity and human rights and the right to just live their life and be a person. So I'm not sure if I answered the question there, Michelle.
Yeah, I think so.
You can change, but it's just got to be done the right
and I think
way.
it does come back to what we said at the beginning, is that this is about choice, though, isn't it? And so whilst we're really trying to develop a good offer for perpetrators who want to change in Surrey, it is also, the police will come after you and will manage and monitor you should you persist. So there is, I think it's both of those, isn't it? It's that balance of we want to offer you help, but also there will be a consequence. I just want to spend a little bit of time. We've got some questions here about male survivors, and one of the questions is whether, if a male survivor discloses abuse, will it be dealt with in the same way or in a different way? Maybe you can talk a bit about the men's service, Fiamma.
Yeah, we at Your Sanctuary we run the male service for the whole of Surrey. So if a male survivor would prefer to be supported by a man, which some do, then we have a male who can support you. And absolutely, as I said, the service is needs led. So just in the same way that female survivors are different, so are male survivors, and so some need longer and shorter periods of support. Some people need more emotional, and some other people need more practical support. So our male outreach worker will work with that person around their needs, their particular circumstances, in exactly the same way that their female colleagues would do. So we're very fortunate in Surrey that we do have a specialist male services areas in the country that don't have that. So whilst tonight I think we've kind of focused on female survivors and male perpetrators, we're absolutely aware that it can happen the other way around. I think it's massively underreported, and I think all the same sort of cultural norms that may lead some men to believe that it's okay to perpetrate domestic abuse, those same cultural norms make it very difficult for men to come forward and say that they are being abused by a woman, particularly if they are physically quite big and the woman is quite small, because again, people are always thinking about the physicality of abuse. So I would say it's even more difficult for men to come forward, and then you layer on that some men are in same-sex relationships and they are actually being abused by their male partner. So when they come forward, they have to say that they're in a same-sex relationship, which can be difficult for some people that aren't out, and then they have to say that they're in an abusive relationship. So we are absolutely aware that it is massively underreported, and all I would say to any of you listening out there is just to come forward if you need some support and help. Phone the helpline in the first instance, or get on the chat, and there will be help and support out there for you.
I think also it's good to say at this point we're really excited that thanks to the Ministry of Justice and the Police and Crime Commissioner, we've just secured funding to develop a black and minoritise survivor specialist worker for Surrey, and also a stalking advocate for Surrey, and an LGBTQ plus worker for Surrey. So what we really hope is that those workers will give us the insight that we don't have right now. So our teams do all sorts of training on all sorts of specialist issues, but there's nothing quite like having a specialist post who can do really targeted work with people, can make people feel more comfortable than they might feel. I mean, people talk often about groups as hard to reach, which is kind of a bit of a nonsense. It's about us not being in the right place to engage with people and us needing to do better as opposed to them being hard to reach. So I think we're really lucky and sorry that we are able to start developing these specialisms, but it will take some time and take time for us to get it right. And I think we also need to think about this for older survivors. Again, older people in general who may be a victim from their adult child, or traditionally older women who have stayed in relationships for many decades. So sometimes we only pick those up through our kind of health-related projects, again, which are really crucial because we need to meet people where they're at, where they access services. We need people to be asking the right questions and then to refer to us if need be. I think we're coming to near the end, but I just wanted to. We've got a really nice and interesting comment here that I just wanted to make a bit of time for. And Samantha makes the point, it's easy to say have items ready, but in my situation it took me talking to the police on another issue that made me realise the situation I was in. If the officer hadn't asked me the questions at the time, which I thought weren't relevant, I would never have seen what was happening to me. 4 years later, and 2 court cases, both with positive outcomes, and I'm now starting to get my life back. It takes time. And I think that's, a really powerful way to kind of sum up is those key messages of people don't always know that they're experiencing coercive control, so we all have a responsibility to try and ask the right questions, to get education out there and to really not be afraid to ask, but also that recovery takes a long time, and actually your life and you will always be different after you've experienced abuse, but that doesn't mean it can't be better, and we work very much so to enable people to get freedom back, and hopefully live lives free from abuse. That's our ultimate aim, above anything. So just in summation, is there any sort of final thoughts that you guys want to leave with before we close?
I'd just like to reiterate that whilst we are, we work brilliantly with Surrey Police, we're very lucky in this county to work in the partnership that you've mentioned a lot, Matt, that actually the only way we're going to really crack this and not go on generation after generation is come together as a community, not only to support survivors, but also to say very, very clearly to perpetrators, this is unacceptable behaviour. There will be consequences. If you don't choose to change that behaviour and stop doing what you're doing, there will be consequences for you. But also, I think we really need to start focusing on children and young people to talk to them when they're young, before they get into a relationship, about how it should be, about kindness and respect and equality. And I think if we could do that, then I think we would see domestic abuse reducing. And so that that would be my plea that we all start talking about that.
And Matt, a final thought from the police?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on, Fiamma. And we often, in the conversations we have, you hear people say, oh, what is the victim or survivor doing about this themselves? And it's almost that victim blaming approach. Why are they still there? And actually the conversations we're having tonight is around actually what are the police doing, what are the services doing, what are the friends and family doing. So have those conversations with people. But actually sometimes we need to go and what are we doing ourselves around these issues. And for us within Surrey, we've got this is such a huge, complex area, but to sum it up, we're just trying to make Surrey an uncomfortable place for perpetrators, and that they're not welcome here, and we will do everything we can do to focus on perpetrators, get the full weight of the police and the wider partnership behind us, and to try to create that space for people to live their lives.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Fiamma. So we're going to wrap it up there, and I just want to say thanks so much, obviously, to Fiamma and to Matt for joining us. But also thank you for all your questions. It's been great to have so many different questions to answer, and I really hope you found it useful. Just a quick reminder that we've obviously talked about some really difficult subjects. Some of you, I'm sure, tuning in will be directly affected by what we've talked about, so please do take note of the support service information in the chat. It will have the details of East Surrey Domestic Abuse Services, your sanctuary, also North Surrey and South West Surrey Domestic Abuse Services, as well as the helpline and the online chat. So just to end on a happier note, as ever, we always end with our dog of the week, which is Police Dog India. So thank you, everybody.
I'm PC Paul Bub. This is Police Dog India, part of the dog unit here in Surrey Police. At the scene of an incident we had last Saturday night, a report of cause of concern for a local resident. Some of his property had been found near the lake, and there was a concern whether he could have either gone in the lake or have come to harm nearby to the lake. I arrived on scene after my colleagues, spoke to them at the water's edge where the property was located. I had India out with me at the time, and we was just discussing our options and where we thought the male might have been. As we were doing so, India's behaviours changed as we got closer to the water, just whining at me and a couple of loose barks, sort of suggesting that there was someone or something nearby to where we were. With that, we made the decision to sort of go over the fence and down to the waterside. As we did so, India went into the lake, then sort of swam round underneath the viewing platform we'd been standing on. I then joined her under that platform where I saw a male laying in the water. With that, I was able to call out to my colleagues for some help. I was able to get him up out of the water into an ambulance where he went off to hospital nearby. Yeah, happy ending to a good story.